All right. Hello. Welcome back to the Bobby Lee Bitcoin podcast. And today we have a very special guest, Diane Long. Diane's been a member of the Shanghai community for close to 40 years. Diane's been living in Shanghai, China since 1985. This is way long, right? And currently she's serving as managing director of Xanadu Enterprises Shanghai. It's a boutique management consulting firm that helps Western companies, American companies, land in China and do business in China. I first met Diane through the Standford Alumni Association of Shanghai. This is like over 10, close to 15 years ago, right?
Absolutely, yes.
And Diane's also been a strong member of the American Chamber of Commerce. And I think you've been, was it president or?
Yep, I was chairman, yes.
Chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce.
Among many roles.
Very esteemed member of Shanghai, of the Americans and foreigners in Shanghai, right? Yeah, so.
Esteemed, I'm not sure, but definitely actively involved.
Very actively involved, yes. So thank you for being on my podcast today. So we'll talk about Bitcoin, crypto. Maybe give some perspective of, besides knowing me, why did you agree to this podcast, like in terms of crypto and Bitcoin?
Well, I think there's a lot of mystery around Bitcoin.
Yes.
For most people who are not in it every day. I have a little advantage, Bobby, because I knew you at the beginning.
Yes.
I remember so clearly when you came to one of the Alumni Association board meetings and you started talking about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And I had, of course, absolutely no idea what you were talking about. It was all gibberish.
This is 10, 12 years ago, right?
Well, whenever it was definitely more than a decade. It's hard to believe Bitcoin's been around that long, to be honest with you, right? So that, because I know you and because it was so early, even though I don't adopt early, I'm an early interested person in almost every technology. So an example of that would be when the iPad came out. You know, I was not an Apple fan until that moment.
Oh, okay.
And then when the iPad came out, I actually happened to be in the U.S. on a family trip, and one night after dinner, there's a Best Buy across the street, and I said, we're going over to check this thing out.
Yeah,
and
it was 2010, I think.
I
Summer
was
of 2010.
just overwhelmingly excited by this once I held it in my hand.
And this is the original first model.
The original first model, the whole
yes.
concept of photos, and anyway.
On the large screen, touch screen, yeah.
And I have become a mini pad iPad owner over the years. I've been fit in my purse. That's the only reason.
Great. I have one too. I started with I also follow a similar trajectory. My first iPad was that very first one. Right. The so-called heavy iPad.
I bought two of them, if you can believe. I was so excited. But anyway, Bitcoin was the same for me. And there wasn't a lot of information online. There wasn't a lot of access to what it means. So that's how I started my journey of understanding, you might say. Yeah.
So did you ever invest or acquire some Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies over the last 10 years?
No, I have not.
So, but you've heard about it in the news, you've read about it, and through living in China, what has your impression been in terms of this roller coaster? Because in the Bitcoin crypto community, people know that China has been notorious about banning Bitcoin and banning it again and banning it yet again. So it's been several sort of tightening of the regulation on Bitcoin.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's true. And that has probably been one of the reasons I have not invested. I am a lazy investor. And if there's a challenge, time-consuming challenge, and I might have trouble accessing my investments, I'm just not interested. I don't have time.
Yeah.
Of course, I've missed some good opportunities along the way, but, c'est la vie. Another reason I haven't invested is because at the same time as Bitcoin came out, blockchain, the whole concept of blockchain started to come out, right? And I researched that too. I studied it, because I'm from the supply chain industry originally, and that's where this blockchain was supposed to make the most impact, right? So I was very interested in how it works. But whenever I asked friends who were in IT or coding or the software engineer side, they would just tell me, oh, Diane, it's too new, it's too early, it's not going to work.
Okay.
So I guess I applied that mentality to Bitcoin. Like, I'm waiting for some moment And because I live in China, it's affected by the atmosphere here.
Yeah. You're waiting for the breakout moment for Bitcoin.
I'm waiting for this moment where it becomes like what it's for, which I know people are making money as an investment.
Yes.
But is that really what the purpose of Bitcoin is to be, Bobby? That's my question.
This is a good topic. It's so the question is whether Bitcoin was always meant to be as an investment or speculation, or there's some greater use for it, right?
Yes.
So the history was Bitcoin was invented by this pseudonymous person called themselves Satoshi Nakamoto. It could be one person, it could be a man, it could be a woman, it could be a group of people. We don't really know who exactly the real person or persons behind it. This was Satoshi first published a white paper to describe the concept of Bitcoin, and that came out on Halloween of 2008. And after the white paper came out, the program, the network itself, started in January of 2009. So it's been about 14 and a half years now.
So we don't know who this person is.
Correct. We don't know who the human people behind it are.
Okay.
But the Satoshi Nakamoto was an online identity. He or she was writing messages back and forth on computer forums talking about Bitcoin in the early days.
English or Japanese?
In English, okay. Actually. Yeah, it was a Japanese sort of name, pseudonym, but it was all the communication was in English. And there's some hints into who the person is, maybe some people in Australia, some people in America. But at this point, it's moot. Sort of, it doesn't really matter who, because the myth and the legend is now greater than the person. So whoever comes out to be the actual Satoshi, people will be disappointed, I think. Yeah. But back to your question. So basically, in the field of computer science, everything. So computer science, computers from the 1960s, the IBM mainframes, to the 1980s, the PCs, to the internet, the 1990s and 2000s. All along, people were trying to digitize money, right? And the challenge is, how do you make money that's usable by everyone online, digital money, yet it's not centralized? So most things in life are centralized, including money. To the money we use today, whether it's in China or the US dollars or the euro, it's all centralized by central banks. And what the researchers and the hackers and the cypherpunks, they called them cypherpunks back then, what they wanted to do was invent a version of digital money that can be used amongst them online to send value back and forth. And that's how Bitcoin came about. It was to solve that problem. And it solved it with the blockchain. Right? And Bitcoin invented the blockchain, what we know today as a blockchain. And that's the result. But back to your question, what is Bitcoin good in terms of everyday for you and me? Right, so there's been two sides to this. There's one side that strongly believes Bitcoin should be used as payment. We use it to pay for things online, to buy airline tickets, make hotel reservations, pay for groceries, pay for coffee at a Starbucks. Transactions, restaurants, and stuff like that. I personally am not a big fan of that, because I being more practical, I think in today's world, whether in China, WeChat Pay, Alipay, or in the US, whether it's credit cards or Venmo or Zelle payments, a lot of those payments are actually quite usable for day-to-day payments. Whereas if you're talking about international commerce, paying international borders, people you haven't met, then Bitcoin would make sense. So I've received payment for speeches and engagements in Bitcoin from international people. So that makes sense because that's faster and more reliable than a bank wire transfer. But for day-to-day person-to-person payments and merchant payments,
we're not there yet.
I don't think we're there yet. And I don't think we'll be there in the near 5-10 years either, just because all the other methods like Visa, MasterCard, WeChat, Alipay, all that just works quite well. That's my opinion. So the other perspective is Bitcoin as an investment, as a store of value. Just like you invest in, let's say, stocks, invest in bonds.
Right.
Some people invest in real estate.
This is how I know about it more. This is what people are doing now, right?
Yeah. So in my mind, I think Bitcoin is a suitable asset class as an investment. So just like some people invest in real estate, whereas others don't touch real estate. Some people invest in stocks and bonds, whereas some people don't do that. And others choose to invest in Bitcoin, in cryptocurrency. So that's sort of my take. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. Yeah. What do you invest in, by the way, Diane? Do you buy gold? Do you invest in stocks or stocks in the U.S. or in China, or what are your favorites?
Mostly in the U.S. through my broker in the U.S. I'm a lazy investor.
Yeah.
And except for instructions not to invest in any military industrial complex companies.
There we go. Yes.
I'm very clear on that.
Yeah.
The others are depending on, normal business concepts.
Yeah. So the use case or the investment case for Bitcoin, I wrote this book. I think I've given you a copy.
Right.
And I talk about it as the future of money and how Bitcoin can work for you. This subtitle, actually, my publisher wanted to put there, how it can work for you. The idea is that you read the book and then it can help you, right? So that's.
Well, it's also a future focused.
Yes. The future of money is what I put in. So the reason I call it the future of money is because the current money system is very much invented and controlled and issued by central banks all over the world. So for the US dollar being a global sort of reserve currency, it will be the Federal Reserve. And as you know, for the last year, the Federal Reserve has been hiking interest rates for the US dollar due to the inflation and to slow down the economy. Try to slow down the high prices and all that. Try to tame the market a little bit, right? And but what it's caused is that because the U.S. dollar now has high interest rate, there's a flight of money going to the U.S. dollar. So that's why the U.S. dollar is stronger now compared to many other currencies, including the Chinese renminbi, the euro, and other currencies. So the U.S. dollar as an international currency has been at one of the all-time highs. It makes U.S. goods more expensive, but it makes it easier and cheaper for Americans to go out on vacation and spend money abroad.
Right. Which is where they're going.
Yeah. So what do you see, by the way, from your management consulting company in terms of catering to foreign companies coming to China doing business here?
Well, for American businesses, it's been a very confusing time.
The last few years.
Especially the last 3 or 4 years. Oddly, under Trump, it looked back, you think it's actually quite calm.
Yeah, back in the Trump days, yes. Administration,
So companies are trying to avoid the geopolitical or trying to be caught up and swept up in the geopolitical conversations.
Yes.
And what does that mean? They're trying, especially if they're big companies, right? I mean, multinationals. The CEO does not want to be called to testify in Washington, so they're trying to stay out of the news. And because there's that messaging, I think the medium and smaller companies are taking note. They're trying to figure out, read the tea leaves. They've always followed the leadership of the multinationals anyway, because they feel they have the access to information and they also have the resources to do the research, proper research. So if they think it's a good investment, we're following, right?
Yeah.
But there's that aspect of geopolitical which has slowed companies down from expanding their footprint in China, and other perhaps newer companies are just saying, well, maybe this is too risky. I don't understand it, and I just don't want to go. There's another aspect, which is this plain business management decisions. So we also have helped some of our clients move abroad.
Okay.
To expand to Vietnam.
So these are domestic clients,
No,
domestic Chinese companies, or international clients?
International companies with
in China,
Chinese investments.
And then they want to move further abroad to Southeast Asia.
And these are more for, I mean, they did it 3 or 4 years ago. We're not talking about automatic now because of this whole, geopolitical back and forth.
Yeah.
It's because of business decisions, right? China stopped being the low-cost producer 1997.
Oh, 1997.
1997, the labor...
You think China lost
Not lost. Let me finish. So 97 is when the cost of labor in China started to increase higher and faster than Southeast Asia.
Agree, yeah.
So if you're only looking at cost of labor, which is the way the media presents it, like that's the only thing you look at, you should have started seeing the tea leaves, reading the tea leaves then, and you should have started a plan.
I see.
To move a certain percentage abroad. And these are companies that manufacture, it could be anything, right?
Yes.
Widgets of any kind. But generally they're lower end items. But what happened in China is that the supply chain concept kicked in, which is a door-to-door pricing idea.
Got it.
You're not only looking at labor.
Yes.
You're not only looking at the logistics from the factory to the port. You're not looking at, the cost of raw materials and where they're coming from.
All together, the whole supply chain
package.
Together. And that was very competitive.
And for 97 to about 2003, so many raw material makers or component manufacturers moved to China for all kinds of industries. But automotive was a big one.
Yes.
So companies like BMW and Volvo and Ford, GM said, if you want to supply our cars, you need to have a factory in China. So this was an example of one industry that made a sea wave movement to China, set up an entire supply chain. So you didn't need to wait anymore for raw material to be shipped or a component to be shipped from Dearborn, Michigan to Shanghai. It was down the street. And, oh, by the way, I can get it to you in 24 hours.
Yeah.
And so this is a kind of aspect of manufacturing and supply chain that the rest never mentioned in media, unless it's a very serious conversation.
Yeah.
And so when this concept of decoupling, when this concept of moving came, it was just, you know how much time and effort it took to get to this level. And logistics, roads were built, ports upgraded, ports became paperless.
Yeah.
All when I first started working here, we would have to get the shipping documents faxed to us.
I see.
So in the morning you'd come to the office and see this huge pile of
faxes,
in the rolls. And someone had to sit down and cut them, right? And it always jammed the machine, print them out, and it'd be, 30 minutes later you get your faxes. And then someone would have to take those shipping documents, personally hand go to the port and say, I know my container has arrived. I have proof.
Yes.
Please find it for me. So it could take 2 weeks just once it arrived in Shanghai to be inspected and the paperwork done, and you could go find your goods.
Yeah.
And today they promise 3 days.
I see.
So
much more efficient.
It's all about time and speed in China, efficiency. So I think that's the aspect people don't realize. So in helping companies move abroad, they're finding that balance now that other countries are actually are in the process of moving in the same direction.
Yeah.
It's not just labor.
Yeah, of course. So you mentioned earlier your clients and this industry supply chain. So what have you heard about blockchain technologies or cryptocurrency facilitating this?
Absolutely zero.
There's no interest or there's no practical solution?
I think it's too complicated for most companies. It's talked about.
Yeah.
And
a lot of hype still.
The technologists at the company, the ITC department.
Yeah, their
job is to keep a track and to say, okay, how can this help? Some companies are using it, but they seem to be more boutique. That's a sales platform for them.
Yeah.
If they want to, so recycled companies, and I'll mention one, say Waste to Wear.
Yeah.
They put in blockchain from the beginning because they're tracking. They use recycled bottles, already used bottles, collected from the sea, collected from the ocean, not clean bottles. These are dirty bottles.
Okay.
And they do want the blockchain so that a client can scan the hand tag of each garment
and find out the
follow the supply chain. So there's a use for it there. You see it in food supply chain. They're following that. Where is this shrimp really from?
Oh yeah, so this is the origin tracking the provenance of food.
But for example, I hate to say this, but my oldest son, he's a coder. He works in the finance industry.
Yeah. And
I have brought up Bitcoin and blockchain. I keep checking with him.
Yeah, to see if he's interested.
And he's yet to be interested. And he keeps telling me, Mom, it's just hype. Blockchain is just hype. It doesn't really do what it says it does. So
yeah.
Who am I to know?
That's fair. There's been a lot of hype. I think.
But there's a lot of discussion. At least it's out there. People would be completely in the shadows of the closet somewhere if they didn't know these two words, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that they overlap causes confusion.
What two?
Blockchain and Bitcoin.
Bitcoin, okay.
So you don't realize that they actually depend. I mean, Bitcoin depends on the blockchain. Blockchain
Correct.
is the structure.
Correct.
And you have to have Bitcoin.
Yes.
So one of my questions also concerns the fact that governments tend to be anti-Bitcoin.
Yes. Good
So
observation.
that,
Yeah.
I mean, even in the U.S., right? They're not
Lately, yeah.
they're
Lately,
not
there's been a lot more of
So
of
could you
that.
explain some of that background?
Yeah, it comes, in my opinion, the anti-Bitcoin or the sort of taking it negatively, governments all over the world, in China, in the U.S., and Europe as well. I think it stems from two different parts, or two different topics. Number one is governments themselves all over the world have had an exclusive monopoly in providing money to its citizens, to its economy. And that's through the central bank. So almost every country have their own central bank that issues and prints their own money. And the people of that country are compelled to use that money. And because you can print it, and by the way, we left the gold standard in 1971. So for the last 50-some years,
I'm actually old enough to remember that.
Yeah. So prior to 1971, money was only printed in relation to how much gold reserve you had. So there was an upper bound of how much money you could print.
Right.
And for countries who did not abide by that, they would see their money just go to waste, just inflation out of control. Okay. So that's why the U.S. became the gold standard. Even in Chinese, we call the U.S. dollar 美元, but another nickname for it is 美金, and that's 美金 is American gold. So it's the U.S. dollar was as good as American gold, right? So you speak Chinese, right?
对.
So that's why 美金 is a very nickname. People still call it that today.
Absolutely.
But since 1971, the U.S. dollar is no longer American gold, and now countries can print it willy-nilly. And in the last, I first arrived in the U.S. for high school in 1989, and since then, I mean, it's gone up like I think printed 5-10 times as much there used to be. That's why there are millionaires left and right, because everybody has more money, because there's just more money circulating around the world. And this is true of the U.S. dollar, of the euro, of the Japanese yen, of all currencies around the world. And countries have that capability. And when countries can print money, it's power. Money is power. So that's why they stay in power, whether it's certain governments or the countries and so on. So when a financial solution like Bitcoin comes around, which was meant to sort of attack and replace and take the place of fiat money, that's where governments get sensitive. And the other aspect about the Bitcoin compared to the U.S. dollar or fiat money is that Bitcoin, there's a notion of freedom in it, as in free speech. Because it's decentralized, meaning Bitcoin is not issued by a specific government or a central bank. It really is a natural resource. So there's no limit on how people can transmit, transfer, and transact in Bitcoin. So if you and I, or if I had Bitcoin, I can send you any amount of Bitcoin any time of the day, to any person I want, whether it's you or someone else. And that's a scary concept to a lot of governments.
But there's no transactional pathway that they can follow?
You're right. They cannot. They barely know. All they can see is anyone in the world can see a certain amount of Bitcoin got sent from one account to another account. And whether that's worth $100 or worth $100 million. People don't know is who's behind the sender and who was the ultimate recipient. There's no real name tied down to it.
I see. Okay.
And it could be done at night, in the dark of the night. It could be done in broad daylight. It could be done, so that's the sort of decentralized, unregulated nature of Bitcoin. So
that means that if Bitcoin is being used for nefarious reasons,
exactly, then it's
that's their reason.
That's the whole topic of what they call money laundering and illicit use.
I see.
Right. So there's been a lot of law enforcement activity against criminals who use Bitcoin for criminal purposes. And of course, I'm not a criminal. I don't condone or endorse the use of Bitcoin for criminal purposes. But But the reality is, because of the features of Bitcoin, meaning it's all free to transact and a lot of freedom there, a lot of criminals end up using it. It's no different than criminals using cash. If you think about cash, paper money.
Well, I was going to say,
right, it's very
cash
similar.
Was the original, the briefcase.
That's right. The briefcase of cash, right? It's anonymous. And, whether you see stories or movies of drugs and cartels, people, drug cartels and mob bosses, using cash payments to transact in their nefarious business activies.
Right.
And these days, a lot of that is replaced by Bitcoin. It used to be cash and gold. Now, most of that is done by Bitcoin. So there's that angle of the money laundering, the illegal activities conducted in Bitcoin, and there's also Bitcoin itself presenting a threat to the monetary system of the governments. So that's why I think for China, if you look at the history for the last 6-8 years, China has banned Bitcoin repeatedly. And I think it's more of the former reason, meaning it's a challenge to the system in terms of a new monetary standard that's different from the Chinese renminbi, the Chinese yuan currency. It's also because Bitcoin price is very volatile. So when trading, the prices go up and down like crazy. I think what the government realizes, they don't want to see ordinary citizens of China, of the country in China, for them to lose a lot of money and then having to knock on the doors of government and complain.
Right.
So that was a big factor as well in the 2017 sort of crackdown on Bitcoin in China.
Well, in China, that is one of the natures of the beast, you might want to say, is that there's this lemming to the sea mentality.
Oh, yeah.
Any great idea, and there will
mad
be a
rush.
And a mad rush in China is just by the nature of the scale of this country.
Yeah.
Is 10 times what any other country might experience, right?
Yeah.
I would also think China, the central government is all about control.
That's right.
In general.
That's right.
If Bitcoin, as you just described, is uncontrollable, basically.
That's right. And this is not just a Chinese government. Other governments are also all about control.
Well, yeah, they may not say it like that, right? But China is just so easy to understand in this regard.
Yeah.
So they would see it, and the renminbi is not exchangeable. It's not. It's fixed. Not an exchange currency.
It's not freely exchangeable. Yeah.
So just think about what that would mean. You have this. And that inability to exchange, just on a normal basis, has protected China from all the ups and downs of the international financial ups and downs, like this recent financial issues in the U.S., right?
That's right.
With Silicon Valley Bank and such. China sits here fat and happy in that regard because they know it's not going to impact them.
That's right.
But if what you're saying, then they would have this uncontrolled, that would just definitely impact. For sure, at every level, and they can't afford that right now.
Yeah, so that's why China mainland has essentially outlawed the trading, the buying, the selling, and the transaction of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. The only small caveat is this year, Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of Hong Kong, they've actually allowed it. So Hong Kong has taken the reverse stance. This year, they're opening up to cryptocurrency industry. Hong Kong has, and is
this an experiment that they're watching,
we
they
think
do
so.
All over China on everything?
We think so. We think as in the industry leaders, think that it's an experiment. First of all, it gives Hong Kong some room, because Hong Kong has been under some economic pressure as well. They're trying to differentiate itself. The nearby Shenzhen and the Greater Bay Area of Guangzhou, Guangdong, Shenzhen, they're rising very fast, whereas Hong Kong economies has been stagnant for the last 3-5 years. Mm-hmm. So Hong Kong, it'll hopefully give a boost to Hong Kong economy itself, and also it's a sandbox allowing the central government of China to see how that plays out. If we allow companies in Hong Kong and allow the people of Hong Kong to more freely buy, sell Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, what does that do? What are the positives and negatives?
Well, that'll be exciting to see how it works. So what would be your recommendations for someone like me who's a lazy investor but interested in new ideas?
So it's all about doing more research and getting comfortable with it. So if you being a successful businesswoman like you are, you've accumulated some savings in which you've purchased, I'm sure, real estate, and you've invested in stock market. I would say, since you've known me for a good dozen years, I would say, take 2 or 5% of your net wealth and consider putting that in Bitcoin. Right? I think Bitcoin, from my perspective, even though Bitcoin has appreciated a lot in the last 10, 12 years, but the reality is Bitcoin has not reached its full potential. It is the future of money, and I think it will become a global reserve asset class. Right now, Bitcoin, all of Bitcoin in circulation is actually only a tenth or less than the value of gold out there.
Oh, interesting.
So if you look at gold is a probably $10-15 trillion market value in terms of all the gold that's in the world, and Bitcoin is way small. Bitcoin is under 1 trillion. It's probably 500 to 600 billion value of Bitcoin. So I personally am very optimistic about the future potential of Bitcoin as an investment. So if you put away 1%, 2%, or even a little bit more, it's a small allocation. And if it doesn't do well, then it's only 1 or 2%, right? But for the potential for it to go up 10 times or even 100 times, then it could double your portfolio investment altogether. So as an American, first of all, in China it's very hard and practically impossible to buy Bitcoin. But as an American, you can access and buy it through your brokerage accounts in the U.S. There's some sort of, they don't have an ETF yet, but they have some funds that track Bitcoin, and then you can also register for an account on an exchange in the U.S. like Coinbase and so on, and transfer money in there to help you buy Bitcoin. Yeah, so it's something to consider, but you have to understand that Bitcoin itself is still quite risky. That's why the price volatility is a little bit crazy. Yeah.
Well, I tend not to watch the price of things.
Well, good. In that case, you'd be good at that.
I am not that kind of an investor.
Yeah. That's actually a good trait. So that means you might make a good Bitcoin investor as long as you don't look at the prices daily.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic. I'm glad you are dispelling some of the shadows around Bitcoin, and I'm also will continue my research on this for the future for sure. Yeah, very good. So thank you, Diane, for being on my podcast, and we'll talk more about it in person. Absolutely. Okay. Good luck, Bobby. Okay, thank you. See you all next time.